Hello, my JV driver friends. It's been a minute since we've been all together. And as promised, there was one tool that we didn't get to spend enough time on when we were together. And I wanted to do a short little recording for you so you have a chance to learn about it and then to practice it. Our whole conversation was about how do we navigate conflict? And part of that is how do we create relationships where we can prevent conflict? How do we get on the same page about how we work together? One of the things that we've been doing a lot of research on recently is this idea of how do we repair after a regrettable event has happened? And no surprise, one of the things that sets up that moment of repair for greater success is a high quality relationship beforehand. So I just want to reiterate some of those key ideas that I shared with you when we were together up in Victoria. So first, we have to remember that 85% of our work is collaborative. And this means we need to tend to and nurture, and be intentional about the relationships we have, particularly the ones that we count on day in and day out. There are three kind of key behaviors of highly effective collaborators. And so I want to share those with you. Highly effective collaborators are able to identify and challenge beliefs, not only in other people, but in themselves. They're able to create productive structures of how do they work together? How do they navigate conflict? How do we navigate disagreements? Who are the owners of different tasks? All of the structures that set up that team for success. And then finally, a key variable or key behavior of highly effective collaborators is that they're able to adapt their behaviors. Now, one of the concepts that I shared when we were together was this idea of islands. And this idea of islands is that I have my island where my preferences live, my lived experiences live, my values live, and you have your island. And so I want to share with you the quick animation again. So I have my island, you have your island. And what happens in relationships is that we can get into a tug of war between whose island feels best for them. When really it's not about winning or losing in many cases, it's about how do we work together differently. So understanding what is our island together. How do we work together? How I worked with you all was different than how I navigated and built a relationship with our clients in Hong Kong because of cultural differences, which is different than maybe how I build relationships with my family, or you might with your spouse or partner, whoever it might be. So think about what's on your island. And now I want to scan ahead a few bits, Nick, so give me a minute. And I want to share with you this practice that we call collaborative commitments. And collaborative commitments is where we take time up front, not just in new relationships, but periodically to say, how do we work together? You know, sometimes we'll see people do this when they bring somebody new onto the team or new to the company, and they talk about, well, what should I know about you? And what do you like in a manager? And all of those things. But the reality is when we're first starting a job, we're probably not going to be as truthful because we want to put on a good face, but also we don't know the dynamic to know if what we need is what we actually need in this space. So collaborative commitments is a practice where we can take time, even if we just take 5 to 10 minutes at the start of a project, when we've been working together for a few years, to say, hey, can we calibrate our relationship? We really like to use the word calibration as well. So some of the things we might talk about is, I'm at my best when. So you need to know that working with me, I am at my best when I have space to be able to talk ideas out loud. My colleague, Dr. Teresa Peterson, would say she's at her best when she gets time to think, because she would describe her brain as having an on-ramp. I struggle to give my best when. I know I struggle to give my best when I feel like I'm being bombarded with emails left and right of where's this, where's this, where's this, instead of getting the space to be able to do it. I struggle to give my best when I haven't had good sleep. I struggle to give my best first thing in the morning. I am prime 9 to 2 p.m. and then like 8 to 11. That's when you're going to get your best from me. What will we do when, not if, we don't show up at our best? And I think this is a really important question because it's not a question of if, it's when. And this allows us to talk about how we want to show up before we get into the heat of those moments. And I'll tell you a quick story. I was working for an amazing leader who asked me this question. And I said, well, if I'm not showing up at my best, call me out. And so, cue a month or two later, and I did something that wasn't effective, and she called me out, and I got pretty defensive. And I'll never forget it. She said, hey, I want to go back to that question we talked about. you told me to just call you out. So I gave you the feedback and then you got defensive. And here's what she said. Did that change for you? Because it didn't change for me. That was like a, ooh, right. All right. What would make this a powerful partnership for both of us? And then finally, what would success look like in this project, on this, right? And these are not the only questions you can ask. These are not the only statements you can fill in. These are just some that we like to do. So I want to share a couple of others. Again, I do my best work when. What do you need from a team? What do you need from yourself? How do we make this a win for all of us? What types of things change the course of your day? And what are your non-negotiables? This is work we often do with teams when they're setting up to start a new project. We do a lot of work with some construction firms when they're entering into a multi-year construction project so that they can get on the same page. And what we do is we have them pair up to be able to talk about with the people who they will have to work with and rely on the most. So here are some of the questions that they've come up with that they like to use. And so I want to share those with you now. What phases of the project will likely be the most fun for you or the most stressful? What types of things help you feel supported? What types of things get under your skin? If the wheels are going to fall off, when is it likely to happen for you? And the default is people will look to find commonalities and to seek where they're similar, but we actually want you to find the friction. We want you to find where your preferences might rub up against each other, where you can say, ooh, that's good to know, because I think I might drive you nuts with how I, work on X, Y, and Z. And then talk about what can you try, right? So there's a couple of different scenarios where this became really important. So here were some of those scenarios with this construction company that I was mentioning, right? Some of the common scenarios are it looks different in the field versus when you're in the meeting. And so they had conversations about this. What does this look like when we're on the field, when we're navigating the site versus when we're in our meeting? How do we navigate when team members are not performing and they're not trained? How do we navigate team members not owning their workload? What are the handoffs that are not discussed with the team? Team members are unprepared or not speaking up in meetings, and team members are shying away from challenges. So the practice of collaborative commitments is making sure that we don't jump into the task before we spend time talking about the togetherness, right? Because so often we don't focus on the relationship until there's a problem. And by then it can be too late. Now, is this going to solve all of your problems? It's not. We're humans. We're going to have sandpaper moments. There are going to be regrettable events. There are going to need to be major decisions made that we're going to have to negotiate or potentially litigate, right, to manage that. But in many cases, if we can take just a little bit of time up front, whether that is with a client, whether that is with a strategic partner, whether that is with a coworker, whether that is with our boss, whether that is with our kids, whether that is with our spouse or our partner, or whatever it might look like, to say, hey, I just want to check in. What do I need to know about, like, where you're at now? And I was just at a conference and somebody was talking about how she mentioned that she'd been managing this team for 5 years. She said, and it's been going really great. And I don't know what happened, but there was a fallout between two of them. And for her, it felt like this massive failure, instead of recognizing that is just what happens in relationships, is sometimes we're really tight and sometimes we pull apart, and then hopefully we can get on track, and we can get on track, right? And we do that over and over and over again. Just like we calibrate a car, we need to calibrate a relationship. So I want to leave you with this final story that can show the power of this practice of collaborative commitments. I was brought in to work with a leader who had people experienced him with an incredible amount of low trust. And if you remember that triangle, nobody questioned his logic or his competency, but they didn't know enough about him. They described him as an enigma, that they didn't understand his authenticity because he was such a private guy, and they didn't feel like he was had their back, so his empathy was real low. So one of the things we did was he had a calibrating conversation, right, to explore these collaborative commitments with each of his team member. He reached out ahead of time. He said, hey, I know we've been working together for 10 years, but I know things have changed, and I just want to pause and make sure we both feel good about this work together. And then he had a conversation out of his office. And what I will tell you is that that fundamentally changed the dynamic of his relationships with the people he supported. It changed how they viewed him, and it changed how he viewed them. And the aha that he had was realizing that it wasn't even the information he got that was so valuable. It was that he cared enough to ask. That was most important. So when we think about building powerful relationships, when we think about being able to navigate those emotionally charged conversations, navigating those conflict, when possible, if we can spend a little bit of time up front, getting on the same page with how we're going to work together, creating our island together, that can make those conflicts a little less painful and not as destructive. So if you have any questions, or if you want to talk through a situation, you can reach out to me, Sarah at sarahnollwilson.com. And I cannot wait to be in conversation with you again over the next couple of months, and especially when we come back together in September. So my JV driver friends, I hope you are all well, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Bye.